Welcome to the library lived in. We are your hosts. My name is Anise.
I'm Lisa.
And this month we are going to be talking about Wyrd Sisters by Terry Pratchett. I thought it was a little bit funny that this book was published the year I was born.
I didn't realize.
Yeah, so it was published in 1988. It is the 6th book of the Discworld series, which is what Terry Pratchett is known for. And there are 41 books in the Discworld series. So
I didn't count them.
Yeah, it's quite a series. And so do we want to just get right into the book or talk about Terry Pratchett a little bit or save that for the end? What do you think?
I don't know. It might be helpful. You're leading. You go.
Okay, so I did want to share something that I found out about Terry Pratchett. So his full name was Sir Terence David John Terry Pratchett, and he was knighted in 2009. And he thought that was so cool that he went out and smelted himself a sword.
For real?
Yeah, he went to a field near his house and dug up some iron ore and smelted it at his house, and then took the metal to a blacksmith and had his own personal sword smelted.
For the knighting.
Yeah.
How many people can say they've done that?
I don't know, probably not very many, and he passed away last summer. So,
right after publishing the last book.
Yeah, a book was published right before he passed.
Yeah. I wonder if he had anything else in the works or if he knew he was done.
I don't know. I think he had been. I did see what he passed away from, but I don't remember what it was. But he had it for several years. It was maybe Alzheimer's or something. So.
Right. Right.
Anyways, so the book Wyrd Sisters, I selected it because it is a parody on several of Shakespeare's works, and so the rating I gave it was 3.5. If I could give it 3.5, that's what I would have given it, because I did enjoy it. I'm not positive if I would read it again, but I figured it tipped towards 4 stars in the scale because I wanted to read the other books. So
that's fair.
Yeah, so I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was good. It had entertaining British humor, and I thought the characters were really memorable. And it was packed with so many pop culture and literary references that I don't know how you could find them all. There were quite a few.
Yes, which this isn't posted on Goodreads, but that link that you found where somebody actually annotated all the different Shakespeare references, that in and of itself was a gigantic work. And I remember reading somewhere how many years it took them. They were on their 4th or 5th draft of that or something, and I thought, oh my goodness, that was a lot of dedication. So
yeah, for sure. So what was your rating?
If we'll use halves, I'll go with 3.5 too. I have this the same experience with As You Like It, where I read it and I would have rated it a 3, but then the more that I read about it and in other resources, and the more that I read about Terry Pratchett and things like that, it made me want to go back and read it again and say some things that I missed, and even, like you said, to explore the other books.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not sold that I would necessarily pick up this same one. I might. But anyway, so we'll go with 3.5.
Yeah. That's exactly what I thought. So to give a summary of the book, it is mainly a parody of Macbeth and Hamlet. So simultaneously, 3 witches meet in a wood. A king is murdered and his infant son kidnapped. The baby falls into the hands of the witches, who find him a home with a band of traveling players, and then they hope that that is the end of their involvement. As it turns out, they keep getting dragged back into the situation when the kingdom makes itself known and demands their assistance. So they reluctantly set out to restore the proper king to the throne. So characters. I'll give a little brief overview of the main characters, and then we can talk about them. So there's Esmeralda, or Esme, Granny Weatherwax. She's like a no-nonsense sort of witch, very tall, stern, and intimidating. She prefers to take the lead, even though, as a rule, witches don't generally have leaders in Discworld, apparently. There is Githa Nanny Og, who is a feisty, toothless mother of 15. I thought she was rather bawdy, very personable, and she appreciates the comforts of life. I liked the part where someone was describing her and said something about her resembling a dictator with all her posterity who come to check on her and bring her things and take care of her. I thought that was funny.
Yes.
And then, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, she says something to that sort of effect to, like, doesn't have to clean or doesn't have to cook because which daughter-in-laws are there? Yeah. Which was really funny when she explains that too.
Yeah. And then the third witch in the trio is Magret Garlic. And she's described as young, rather plain looking, but not unattractive if looked at from a certain angle. I think somewhere it says something about her hair resembling a hedgerow. She's a New Age type witch who wears profuse amounts of silver jewelry. She started the coven because it seemed proper. She's newly trained as a witch and is more focused on the ceremonial aspects of practicing magic rather than the practical, since she does not have the amount of experience that the 2 older witches have. So, why don't we talk about the witches before we move on? Which witch was your favorite?
Oh, that's hard. I didn't even think about having to pick one. I love all of them. I might have to go with Nanny. I might have to go with Nanny. I liked Magret. But I don't love, like, she's just probably not the favorite. Yeah. And I think Granny is funny, or Weatherwax.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think she's funny, but she has, like, moments. I think Nanny is more, like, entertaining kind of consistently.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I might have to lean that way if I have to pick one.
Yeah, I agree. I liked Nanny Og the best, but most of the story I did kind of feel bad for Magret.
Yes. She just kind of gets the short end of things a little bit. They kind of talk about her like, no, downstairs. They kind of talk about her like, I don't know, like she's the naive one that doesn't really know anything, and they kind of roll her eyes behind her back a little bit, that sort of thing. So you do feel a little bit bad about her, like she doesn't know what she's doing. So,
and so I did select this book that is, I mentioned that it was the 6th book in the Discworld series. It is the 2nd book of the Witches storyline. And everyone online said that it was a good one to start with, which I agree. I've since started reading the 1st book, and in the 1st book, it only has Granny Weatherwax. It does not have the other 2 witches. So I'm thinking that was a good call to start with this one. So other main characters we have are King Varennes, who is the ruler of Lancre. Lancre is the kingdom that they all live in. He is murdered by his cousin and becomes a ghost. He has a difficult time accepting this at the beginning. Death explains it to him very patiently, but the former king does not accept it well. So honorable mention for Death, who shows up in a lot of Terry Pratchett's novels. And there seems to be a consensus that Death is Terry Pratchett's greatest character.
I did read that.
Which I think is probably true. I find it rather funny that he speaks in all caps.
Yeah. Like not at all the way you would, he's not how you think of Death. But that's sort of Terry Pratchett's thing, so.
Yeah. So we also have Duke Felmet and his wife, who is, Duke Felmet is the king's cousin, and he stabbed him and pushed him down the stairs. And I think it was the wife's idea. So they took over the kingdom, even though Felmet despises the kingdom, and his wife was simply power hungry. The previous king's fool, or jester, remains in the castle to work for the Duke, though he has never felt like working as a jester is his life's calling. And then we have the kidnapped prince, who the witches named Tom John. And he's taken in by Vitoller and his wife, who run a band of theater players. Also in their company is a genius dwarf playwright named Huel, who is based on Shakespeare.
It took me the whole book to figure out how to say his name.
So I guess we'll start with King Varennes. I liked the scene where he found out he was a ghost and he was going all over the castle. I thought that was really clever, and I was slightly horrified when he went in the kitchen and there were all those animal ghosts from everything he'd been eating.
Yes, that was a bit atrocious. And very quickly, I think, would make you a vegetarian if you spent too much time in that room.
Yeah, totally. So I thought that was good. We had the cameo by Death at that point, which I had seen a couple of Terry Pratchett movies before, so I knew. Well, I didn't. So this was the first Terry Pratchett book that I read, so I didn't know that he spoke in all caps, which was a nice surprise because it was funny. But I was glad that he was there. What did you think of Duke Felmet and his wife?
They were interesting. That introductory conversation where Felmet is just like, yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear. And the whole thing is like he has no idea what she's even talking about. And he's talking, you have the little Macbeth thing with cutting down the trees. And anyways, that really kind of just introduces how it is. Like he has no idea. He's just doing whatever she says through the whole thing. Anyways, it was a good way to introduce them, I think. So
yeah, I thought so too. So he eventually ends up going crazy. I'm not sure if it was driven by guilt or he was just already crazy, but he goes very crazy. And you find out how truly evil his wife is. So what happens is the witches show her like her true personality because she loves to torture people and do all kinds of awful things. So she looks at who she truly is and she doesn't care. And she's glad that she did it and said she would do it again.
Right. The fact that she's proud of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only do I not care about all these things that I've done, but I'm proud of it, and I would do it again. Says a lot of, how many of us can look back on our less, our less than brilliant choices and say, yes, I would do that again. Yeah. Hopefully most of us are embarrassed and would, like to change the things that we've done in our past that aren't so great.
And so she gets her comeuppance at the end from the kingdom. So I think we'll get to that in a moment. So the kidnapped prince, when the witches, they give him to the band of players to raise, and then I suppose it's traditional in Discworld for witches to bestow a gift. And so they can't come to a consensus of what gift they want to give him, so they each just come up with their own and give it to him. And so I wrote down what they were. Because I thought they were interesting gifts. So Magret gives him the gift of making friends easily. Nanny Og gives him the gift of a flawless memory. And Granny Weatherwax gives him the gift of being whoever he thinks he is. So what did you think of those gifts?
I had to think about them a little bit. I feel like they're sort of, I mean, they're telling for the characters, of course, that give them, you know, because Nanny Og can't ever remember anything, and because Magret just doesn't feel like she has the friendship, you know, whatever. So they're very telling of that. I think Granny's gift is the oddest one, but it's the story really well. It makes for a very interesting. It makes the character interesting. It makes Tom John very interesting. But like that, he has this power, you know. It's just kind of fascinating how that comes into play, and he doesn't even know that that's a thing. You know, he doesn't know why it happens. He just knows it happens. I don't know. What did you think?
Well, I thought it was really interesting because, and so I guess we're kind of moving into plot and storyline now, is that, all of these animals from the forest come to Granny Weatherwax and somehow let her know that they aren't happy with Felmet being king. And so the witches set out to find Tom John and restore him to the throne. But there's like this whole time traveling thing they have to do with magic so that he can be of age to be king. And so they do that, and then Tom John is really amazing at being an actor because he's been raised with this group of players, and because of the gifts that they gave him, I think they kind of thwarted their own objective by doing that. They didn't know that they were, but they gave him exactly what he needed to be a super amazing actor. And so then when it comes down to it and he's back in the kingdom, he doesn't want to be king. And I thought that was really interesting, especially since it mentions destiny several times. And I think it was Granny Weatherwax at one point, she said, destiny is important, but people go wrong when they think it controls them. It's the other way around. So she says that you can control your destiny, but they did all of these things thinking that they were causing things to happen one way when they happen a different way. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it's what I think it is or if it's the opposite of what I think it is.
I felt like I had that train of thought, that experience through the whole reading of this book. Like, is it what I think it is? Or is it not? I'm not sure I'm getting it. Like, I think Terry Pratchett's a little cleverer than I am, maybe. But I didn't think about that. That's a good perspective, that the gifts that they gave him completely undermined what they were trying to do. It also makes me kind of wonder, like, I need to go look up old fairy tales and see what are the gifts that have been given, you know, like what were the gifts that were given throughout, you know, what did they give Sleeping Beauties, you know, all these different things, and kind of compare, because I know Pratchett was also a bit of a buff on those sort of things, and just to see how that plays, like there's any relationship there.
Yeah.
I don't know, But yeah, it completely undermined what they were doing, but it all worked out.
It did. So, also talking about the story, what did you think about the lack of chapters? I didn't even notice until I was like a quarter of the way through the book. I was like, oh, there's no chapters. And so I read why Terry Pratchett does that, and what he said was that life does not happen in chapters, so he does not write that way.
Is that all of his books?
I think he only has 2 or 3 that have chapters. Like his young adult books, and maybe 1 or 2 others where it like fit into the story. Like he had subheadings that he wanted in there, but I think most of them do not. And I really enjoyed the way that the story flowed without all of those cliffhanger chapter endings that always bother me in other books.
It's like you never know on a different book, like you never know when to stop. You never know, you know what I mean? Like it makes sense if you're reading a book to say, I'm gonna read through the end of this chapter, I'm gonna put my bookmark and I'm gonna go do whatever I have to do, right? But you get to the end and then you're like, I have to know what happens next. And so it really doesn't make sense to do that. And I have a sister-in-law who actually said she specifically ends, like when she has to stop reading, she stops in the middle of a chapter on purpose, so that she doesn't have the cliffhanger to think about or to whatever, so she can focus on whatever else it is she has to do.
Yeah.
So I really did like that until I got to like the last quarter of the book, and I felt like I just needed to read it all at once, and I couldn't put it down at all because I thought I just don't know where to stop anymore. But that's my own problem. I did like that bit of formatting. I wasn't such a fan of like some of the other formatting in the book, but I loved that part of it. So,
yes, I agree. So we should probably talk about the Fool a little bit. So one of the first times when you're introduced to him in the book, he is down in the kitchens playing a game with the cook and somebody else, and somebody knocks at the door, and I think the cook says, "There is a knocking without," he said. "Without what?" said the Fool. "Without the door, idiot." The Fool gave him a worried look. "A knocking without a door," he said suspiciously. "This isn't some kind of Zen, is it?" And I thought that was really hilarious. And so that goes on for a little while, and that is taken, I think, from Hamlet, or maybe it was Macbeth. There's apparently in one section of the play there are a lot of stage directions of knocking with it, and so in this one there's knocking without.
Right, which is one of those like tiny little Shakespeare references that there are millions of in the book, maybe not millions, tons of throughout this book. And if you've read the Shakespeare works, that, if you've read Lear and Macbeth and Hamlet, then when you read it, then you recognize it and it makes you laugh. And it's kind of, the little, I don't know, nod of the hat or nod of the head, like, but if you haven't read it, it's okay. It's not that you have, but it's like a little inside joke there, little author inside joke. And those are lovely.
Another one that I thought was funny was at one point when Felmet is going crazy, he's like, "Is this a duck I see before me?" when it's supposed to be a dagger, but it's still funny either way.
Right. Which also is the Monty Python thing, yes?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it is. Aaron was actually quoting that today. But I think in that, we're going to just have to link that file now for anybody that feels like going to read it. But I think they bring it up in that too, that there's the Monty Python joke too. So yeah, like you were saying, Pratchett has like current pop culture references. I know Monty Python's not brand new.
Well, no, so this book was published in 1988, and I was so disappointed in myself that I did not get the Andrew Lloyd Webber reference.
Oh.
When I saw it, I was like, "Oh, that's what that was." I should have known.
There were a couple that I was like, "Oh yeah." But there's so many. Like, for you to get them all and keep track of the story, of course, it took the person 5 or 6 versions, whatever, to get that file going, because it's a lot.
Yeah, so I kept track of the few references that I got right away, and so let's see, I got a few Lord of the Rings references.
Yes.
Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, Snow White, and the Disc Theater.
Yeah, that one was kind of obvious.
Yeah.
I didn't get Will. I didn't get Well and Will for whatever reason until the end of the book, when I don't know, that should have been like the big glaringly obvious one to me. But I was just reading the story, and it was lost on me, the pronunciation of Well. Like, the whole time I was like, how are you supposed to say that? So I just didn't put that together. And then when I finally did, I was like, oh, what's wrong with me?
That's funny.
So, oh well. Oh well. But there were some great references. And that's what makes me, like, that's the thing that makes me think about rereading it or reading the other ones, is all of that sort of thing going on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
It's pretty good.
So let's see. Diverse alarums and excursions.
Yes. Did you look it up?
I did. So, I have the quote here. Magret takes Nanny and Granny to see the theater players because neither of them have ever seen a play before. And Granny Weatherwax pretends that she has, because she's very proud. And so they go to the theater. They don't understand that it's pretend, and they see, like, people getting stabbed and are, like, screaming out, "He did it!" or whatever. And so then they go behind stage to talk to the players because they think that this might be a good place to leave the baby. And they see a script. And so Granny Weatherwax picks up the script and she starts reading it, and she reads, "Diverse alarums and excursions," she read uncertainly. "That means lots of terrible happenings," said Magret. "You always put that in plays." "Alarums and what?" said Nanny Og, who hadn't been listening. "Excursions," said Magret patiently. "Oh." Nanny Og brightened a bit. "The seaside would be nice," she said. "Oh, do shut up, Githa," said Granny Weatherwax. "They're not for you. They're only for divers, like it says. Probably so they can recover from all them alarums." So, I did not think that it was a real thing, but when I looked it up, diverse alarums and excursions was used mainly as a stage direction in Elizabethan drama, and it means martial sounds and the movement of soldiers across the stage, or clamor, excitement, and feverish or disordered activity.
Yes. So the first time, like the quote you just read, I kind of was like, I'm just going to let it pass. I'm just going to keep going. But they mention it other times, like later in the story, and I thought, okay, it's a thing, and I need to know what it is, and it's bugging me that I don't know what it is, and I finally looked it up. So it's much funnier.
It is.
It's much funnier when you actually know. And there's another instance there, like the incredible amount of knowledge that must have been stuffed in Terry Pratchett's head. Like, who knows that? Who knows that little thing there? So. But it makes a lot of sense anyway. A lot more sense when you look it up and you know.
Yeah, I thought it was very funny. Let's see. I wrote down a few other things that I liked. So witches only use the back doors on their houses. which is funny. And it says there were only 3 times in your life when it was proper to come through the front door and you were carried every time.
Yes.
I liked that, and I thought it was a little bit romantic. And I thought it was so clever because just in one sentence, it gets the idea across and you immediately know what those 3 times are. Or at least I think I do. So what do you think the 3 times are?
That's not fair.
No, I mean, this is just me. I didn't look it up or anything.
So I would go with birth, marriage, and death.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Okay. You're going to tell me I'm wrong. That's what I would go with, which I suppose is only applicable to the witches because, you know, I guess you wouldn't be carrying the wizard through the front door on his wedding day, but I suppose you could. So, but it's so, it's just one of those little lines that's not really, I don't know. It just stands out and catches you, but it's not necessarily like a huge part of the plot, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's really neat, and I liked that too. Yeah. My in-laws have a sign by their back door that says "Back door guests are best."
Oh.
And we had teased them for like years before about never using the front door. Nobody even goes to the front door. If the front doorbell rings, it's a stranger. It's somebody who's never been to the house before and doesn't know, you know. And you've been there, like, you know, everybody, you know, you park in the back and you walk down the back door. So, but that's something we kind of, even though we tease them, you love about it. Like it's, you know, everybody's welcome. So.
That's really cool.
Anyway.
So we talked about the Fool a little bit, and so it turns out that Magret kind of likes him and he kind of likes her, and so she finds out his first name by throwing apple peels over her shoulder, and I think she must have done something else to figure out his name. And I actually thought about it really hard, and I was like, could you get that name out of apple peels? And you could.
Remind me.
So his first name is Varennes, just like the king.
Yes.
And
yeah.
So you could totally make that name out of apple peels.
Would be. Yeah, you're right.
So his name is Varennes, and there are several hints throughout the story as to what his destiny is. And so the Fool ends up helping Duke Felmet, not because he wants to, but because he, in his profession as a fool, he is supposed to be loyal to his king. And so since Duke Felmet is the new king, he tries his best to be loyal to him. And so he says that they should use words to get the people to love them and to distrust the witches and to just make everything how they want it. And he says that words are more powerful than magic, which I completely agree with. And I liked all of their discussions surrounding that and what a big part it played in the story.
Absolutely. That's one of those great, like, come back and quote later moments as to the power of books and words and why we have to share ideas and free speech and all of those things, you know, all of those ideas. Because it's completely true. It's completely true when you can open your mind and look at somebody else's, you know, words or thoughts. And when people use them, I don't know, people use them to their advantage. So there's plenty of times where words and thoughts and ideas can be used to control a situation, to manipulate a situation in a way that's not right either. So it makes you think.
Yes. And so eventually what happens is the witches bring Tom John there, and the treachery of Duke Felmet and his wife is revealed, and they're taken care of. Felmet snaps and stabs everybody with a fake dagger.
That's awesome.
Then he thinks that he's dead and a ghost, and Death shows up and tells him he's not a ghost. And then he's like running around with a bed sheet on his head, and falls off a tower and then actually dies. And so Lady Felmet goes, they imprison her, and she escapes and goes out into the forest, and all of the forest animals attack her and eat her, I assume, because she was really the one who was behind the kingdom going to Felmet instead of a king who would have loved it. I'm not convinced that if Tom John had been king that he would have loved it. I think it mentions when he first enters the country, he's kind of like, oh, what are we doing here? Which I'm not sure if that was just from the way he was raised, just always traveling around, or what. And then Varennes the Fool becomes the new king because he and Tom John were brothers. And I don't remember if it was Granny or Nanny Og, but one of them had delivered him. I think maybe it was Nanny Og had delivered him and knew that they were brothers. So what did you think about that situation? I had to read it like 5 times before I understood what it was saying.
About the birth situation?
Yeah.
I don't know. I had to go through it more than once. And I think it's twisted, isn't it? Because I think she says they're brothers because the old king, Varennes, was both of their father.
That's what I thought at first, but I don't think that's true.
Well, okay, so I could be wrong. The way I took it was that she publicly said, like she publicly said to whoever was at the performance that was the case. But then when she got alone with Magret, she said, well, what really happened was that the fool's father that ran off was the father, and that the queen was his mother. And you can't really say that because I think with whatever, how would you call it, like line of succession, it had to be from the king. So I think and she said, but you're not really going to tell, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're just gonna keep that between the two of us because really everybody's happier this way. Yeah, and it's gonna work out fine. But I had to read it again too because it very quickly, I think, transitions from one to the next, and you're like, wait, did I just read it wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it doesn't say it in so many words. Like the way she phrases it, you're still kind of like, what? Yes, which is, I think, why you read it more than once. You're like, I missed something. I missed it. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's how it came about. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so do you think, and it seemed like Varennes was going to make a good king because he was prepared to work really hard at it, because he did not like being a fool. That's what he had done because it was expected of him because the rest of his family were fools. So do you think that he made a good king only because he didn't want to be a fool anymore? Or do you think that he, just because he was willing to work hard, or why do you think he would have been so much a better king?
Well, I think you hit on part of it, which is the loyalty aspect of it, which it's been that he's been loyal to each ruler. But I think the reality is that it's a loyalty to the kingdom. Mm-hmm. How many people, when you have, a usurpation of the throne or whatever, the people that were there under the loyalty of the previous king, like they're out, we're done, you're gone, whatever. But he stays, and he is completely loyal to the new king. I think that has more to do with his loyalty to the kingdom, even though it's not said in so many words. Right. That, and there's a great line, like right at the end of the book, about how, how like he goes through training, like there's a school for fools, which I think is hysterical. Like this, it makes it sound very collegiate. Yeah. And that, you're not allowed to tell a joke that isn't approved. And everything, it's such a serious business to be funny. And when he was at this college, the school, like you couldn't go have any fun. You couldn't do anything because you were studying so hard at this business of being funny And so then there's this line, like right towards the end of the book, about how the kingdom wasn't going to, this wasn't going to be a light business at all. It wasn't going to be funny, and how relieved he was that that's not going to be the case. He was so happy that it wasn't going to be funny business.
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny, and I think that's sort of telling in his whole situation is it really is serious business to run a kingdom, but it's different from the way he was, like, in the story, in this universe, whatever, where this, that's how it was to become a fool, that he was drilled and everything was just such. And here he is, he's going to be able to lead with his heart and with what he thinks is right. And he has a good sense of right and wrong. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you mentioned they only had certain jokes that they were allowed to tell. He showed initiative by coming up with his own jokes, but then he wasn't allowed to tell them. So I think that just must have been really stifling.
Yeah.
And it's no wonder that he was so unhappy.
Yes. And I don't know, what do you think about Magret having kind of an influence on him? Because she kind of asks him throughout the book a few times, like, why doesn't he speak up, or why doesn't he act differently? Why are you going through with this trip? And well, because I'm supposed to. That's what I do,
So he has a really strong sense of duty.
Yeah.
So.
But I kind of wonder if she didn't help rub off on him, like, because he speaks up in the end.
He does, and Magret gets to be queen. Eventually, I think that's what happens. It doesn't say it in so many words, but I think that's what happens.
Yes, exactly, which is a lovely thought.
And so you mentioned also something about the universe. So the setting and world building, we can talk about Discworld in a minute, but I found out something about specific to this story. So this story was set in a kingdom called Lancre. And what I found was that it may not be entirely a coincidence that Lancre is a common way of referring to Lancashire, the county where the famous 17th century witch trials were held. So I looked up a little bit about that because I had never heard of them. And so they were some of the best recorded trials of that time period, and are unusual because the clerk of the court published the trial proceedings in a book, and because of the number of accused hanged at once, which was 10. And so there's an estimate that of all of the English witch trials between the early 15th and 18th centuries resulted in fewer than 500 executions. And so this series of trials accounts for more than 2% of that total. Of that, 400-year period. So.
Well, look at that.
Interesting. I think it always surprises me how authors use things like that as sources. Because when I was reading about that, I found some references that are in Harry Potter also. There's like a castle or something that was called Malkin. And I was like, oh, Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions.
Yes.
So everyone always takes names from things that are so connected, but then you don't notice unless you already know about it.
Exactly. Hence, you can enjoy the book, but if you know, it's the inside joke. It's, and I know Harry Potter, that's one of those where people have picked apart the meaning of every name and every place and everything. And I know this many of them, but the more you find, the more you're like, that's really cool. So that's interesting with the witch trials there.
That's what I thought also. And also, on a kind of related note, you sent me the book recommendation for the book that Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman wrote together, which is called Good Omens, the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, witch. And one of the witches that was executed in this trial, her name was Alice Nutter. So that must be where they got that name from. They just changed it a little bit.
There you go. Which, yeah, I hadn't read it. I've read a couple of Neil Gaiman's, not anywhere near everything that he has, but like him, so. But yeah, so it makes you think I need to brush up on my history, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. So also the setting and world building, this kingdom is in a world called Discworld, which is a disc-shaped planet, so it's flat and round, and it is 10,000 miles across. It's balanced on the backs of 4 elephants who are standing on top of a ginormous turtle as it swims through space. So what do you think of that?
I'm sure there's symbolism to that I don't get. Like I've wondered, like, why a turtle and why the elephants, and I haven't found anything about it. I think it's interesting, like the choice of making the world flat. I think that's probably part of, I don't know what the right word is, but Terry Pratchett flips everything on its other side. And the whole idea that we have come to the point where we know the world is not flat and we know the world is round, but we're still dealing with a lot of the same issues and things that we did, how many hundreds of years ago when we didn't know any better. So I think there's something to that. I don't know. Did you find anything about
not really, just that there are several indigenous cultures who have a tradition of a world turtle, so that may have had something to do with it, but I don't really know. It's just kind of ridiculous and funny, and I liked things like they don't have north and south or east and west in Discworld. They have rimwords and hubwords, which is really funny. Because I think several times it mentions something like the lichen on trees grows on the hubwards side or something. And so like it's kind of familiar, but then just kind of weird, but you still know what it means.
Right, which is mark of a good author, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's fun. I don't know. I just kept thinking, wouldn't the elephants get tired of holding it all up? I don't know. So it's kind of random, I think, but I would love if we ever find why he did that. Why did he choose that? I would love to find that answer.
Yeah. And then there was something else that I found about the title of the book. So in Macbeth, the 3 witches are sometimes referred to as the Wyrd sisters.
Right.
But there's a little bit more to it in this case than just the Macbeth reference. So Wyrd, spelled with a Y, is the Norse concept of destiny or fate, as embodied by the Norns, who probably inspired the witches in Macbeth. Since weird to a modern reader just means strange, it's easy to miss the overtones of the title and just assume that it's an old spelling of weird. So being the concept of destiny or fate, which is talked about over and over in this book, I think it's really cool that it's weaved into the title that way. So if you had known that it was the Norse concept of destiny, then you would have immediately had kind of like a little peek into what was going to be happening.
Right.
But I didn't.
I remember reading that somewhere after the fact. I don't think we posted it anywhere, but we probably found the same reference because I remember like that sounds word for word. But yes, like it would have been great maybe to have that clue ahead of time. And destiny is such a big part of the story.
So we have a comment. So David says, does anyone ever visit downwards towards the elephant? And I have no idea. I think I read something about, so in Discworld, there's like all these scientists and all kinds of like really smart people who are trying to figure out things about the elephants and about the turtle, like about what gender it is and things like that. I believe in The Color of Magic, which was the first Discworld book, which I have not read, but I have seen the movie. They end up in a boat that is going towards the edge of the disc. And so the edge of the disc, the ocean just like pours off into space. I guess down onto the elephants, I don't really know. It just pours down and they're about to get like washed off the planet. But I think you probably die if that happens. And he says, what if the turtle meets another turtle? And I think there's something about that too in some of the other books. I read about it. They're really worried about if the turtle is like, why it's swimming through space, like if it's trying to find other turtles or what's going to happen. But I think they're very worried about it.
What is the symbolism there? Is, like, what's going to happen?
I know. I think somewhere it said something about they were worried about if the turtle is getting ready to mate, like it's going to destroy somebody's world.
That's fantastic.
I don't know. If I lived in Discworld, I would probably be really worried about that also.
Just a little bit. I'm kind of thinking it's a problem. Like, how does the water replenish if it's just pouring over the edge into the...
I don't know. So the middle of the disc is called the hub, and there's like a 10-mile high mountain that is supposed to be like their Mount Olympus. So they have this mountain in the middle, and that's where all of the magic, like the Discworld's magic field emanates from, and that's where all of their gods live. And so I don't know. It's very interesting. He put a lot of thought into this ridiculous world.
Ridiculous world. Oh, well, I don't know if we read all the rest of the books at some point. Maybe we'll find out what happens to the turtle.
I guess we will. So we should maybe talk about the animated movie version that we also watched.
So before you do that, can I say one thing that annoyed me?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's in the book and not so much the movie.
Yeah.
Okay, just before you switch. So there are several times that as I was going through the book, that there was something that stood out and bugged me, and I thought, I'm just going to let it, I'm going to just let it pass, and I'm just going to keep reading. I'm going to let it pass. By the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, this has happened too many times, and I don't know if it's just me. So I want to know if it bugged you or not. And so I'm going to read the last, I saved an example when I was thinking towards the end of the book. So this, I think this is when they're getting ready for the play.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the castle was full of people standing around in that polite, sheepish way affected by people who see each other all day and are now seeing each other again in unusual social circumstances, like an office party. Did you notice that? Do you know you know what I'm talking about? So,
No.
So you're going through. There's no office. There are no offices anywhere in the book. There's no context for an office party inside the book.
No, I know it's for us.
I know, but so I'm reading it and I'm thinking to myself, everywhere in that whole sentence, right up till that comma, I'm thinking it's like an office party. I've been to one of these. I know what he's talking about. So when he says it, I'm like, why'd you have to say it? First of all, you're telling me that that's what it is, instead of letting me know figure it out for myself. But really the main thing being that there's no context. So the whole suspension of disbelief is gone for me for a minute. I have to pick myself up and put myself back in the story. And there were several times throughout the book where he made these little comments, they're humorous, but I felt like it took away from the story because it picked me up out of the story for a minute and put me back in the real world.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of it that way. To me, it seemed more like when you're watching a movie with somebody and they say something funny about what's happening or about what someone says or how they look or something, and then you just laugh about it and then you keep watching it. That's more of what it was like for me, I think.
Yeah. I could see that. It just bugged me that the narrator's saying that. You know, like if you said it, it would be fine.
Yeah. No, and I thought there was one part, I think, at the beginning when it was kind of like introducing Discworld, or it said something about Discworld, the way he was telling it, he was like, he was describing like a movie scene, like zooming in and panning over,
Yeah.
like hearing the sounds that you would hear if you were watching a movie version of this, which I thought was funny. It just humored me because like he's describing something that I've never had described to me before. I've just only seen it with my eyes, but when he describes it, I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yes.
And I thought it was just really clever.
I did, and I think he does it a couple other places on a much smaller scale. From like when you're watching the plays, you know, when they're performing, the players are playing, on a much smaller scale, where he calls out a couple things, and it completely, I think, makes you see it through the eye of film, or like, you know, watching it happen. And anyways, it's fun. I liked that perspective. That part was fun. Okay, so I didn't mean to sidetrack you. You can talk about the movie now.
No problem. So we watched the movie version also. It did not look to me like it was filmed in 1997. Like when I looked at that animation, I was like, whoa, this is 80s. Because it was not super good quality. I liked that they kept in a lot of the great lines, but they did not have the same impact that they did in the book, because in the book there's like a lot of footnotes, there's a lot of descriptions of people's thoughts and things that just aren't there in the animation. And so I thought it was missing a lot because of that. But if you have read the book, I thought it was funny.
Yes, that probably makes a difference if you've read the book. And I really think if you're watching that movie, you're probably a fan, you know, of Terry Pratchett at least, if not of the book. I'm thinking you probably wouldn't just pick it up and make your way through that whole movie. Like you said, especially the animation was really awful. But the lines were great. But you miss a lot. And they do some, like I noticed some of the animation, like they would fill in things that you would have heard in like the thoughts of the characters in the book. They try to fill in like the action of what's happening, but it just wasn't consistent. It wasn't enough. So it was just kind of.
Yeah, and I thought there was one part that I noticed. It was probably one of the only parts that was not in the book, was when that headless ghost was like going all around and his head was like missing or something.
Yeah.
You know, it was something I was like, what are you doing? This movie is already 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And it's like rapid fire. It's like lines and lines and lines and just moving on. And then they just had that random part in there that wasn't in the book. And I didn't think it made sense, or.
Right. There's no need to add anything right now.
No.
They didn't cut much.
No.
So your eyes. Yeah, they didn't cut much. And so adding anything was kind of just, I don't know, didn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's something else. You brought up the footnotes, which if you haven't read Terry Pratchett, that's really funny. Like he puts in all those little footnotes throughout the book, which is not a fiction thing.
No.
But they're funny. They're funny little additions to the book, and you kind of have to read them because you're missing out if you don't.
Yeah.
So, and you miss that in the film too.
So one thing we did not talk about was the, what is it? Droit de seigneur. So there's a funny footnote that goes with that one.
Say that again?
There's a funny footnote that went with that one when Thelmet was thinking about it.
Yes.
That's when the idea is first introduced, that it's some kind of dog and he wants one and he wants to exercise it, which is hilarious. So what it is the right of the first night, which is a custom alleged to have existed in medieval Europe, giving the lord of the land the right to sleep the first night with the bride of any one of his vassals, which I think is terrible, and I never heard of this before. But so the old king, King Varennes, who got murdered, apparently did this, and quite often. And so Felmid, who is not the same kind of person as Varennes is, he's like more of a scrawny person, you know. Weak, yes. And so he, at one point, he's thinking to himself, right after he becomes king, that he wants to be like King Varennes in that respect, and he wants one of those because he thinks it's some kind of dog. And so that's referred to several times throughout the book, and I think Magret thinks that it's a dog also.
This is one of those situations when the witches are talking about it. It's one of those situations where you feel bad for Magret because she has no idea what's going on. And they're talking, Nanny and Granny are talking like you would around a kid without explaining. I don't really want to explain what this is to you, so we're just going to pretend like you don't know what's going on, and we're going to talk over your head about it. And they say something about it being hairy too. They're like comparing different leaders, I think, or different kings from the different years.
Yeah.
And I think that's why she thinks it's a dog, is because they call it like it's hairy, as in like a hairy situation. You know. But they say something about it being hairy and the fact that old King Varennes needed to exercise it a lot. So I think she thinks too. Yeah, she says something about it being a dog too, which is funny. But that's one of those times you feel bad for her. And I did know what it was, but only because that book that I was telling you about, the 100-year-old man who jumped out the window and disappeared. I just read that, and that phrase comes up, or that term comes up in that book, and I didn't know what it was then, so I had to go look it up. And so when it came up in this one, I was like,
that is super interesting. So I had to look it up, and then I had like a list on Wikipedia of books or movies or things that mention it, and like Mark Twain talked about it in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, and there's several other books that I had heard of but not read where it's mentioned.
Well, now I have a new reading list, right?
Yeah.
There you go. I can add the Jonas Joseph book to the Wikipedia list. So yeah, it's funny, but yeah, it's one of those things that you would completely just skip over if you didn't know, you wouldn't realize why it was funny. So,
definitely.
There were a lot of little things like that, I think. So, like I didn't get the Charlie Chaplin reference.
I didn't see that. No, when I watched the so I read it in the list of references, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then when you watch the film version, like it's very obvious that it's Charlie Chaplin when Well is sitting there and he's like brainstorming or whatever. Then it shows in like his little thought bubble, little Charlie Chaplin clip.
Which I feel like that's one of those things. Okay, if you're a fan of Terry Pratchett and you're watching the video, like if you're making the video because you're a fan of Terry Pratchett, then you're including that because it's a nod to the author. But yeah, so what is that? I was gathering that Well gets his inspiration from his dreams.
Something like that. And I think at one point it says something like inspiration just like flies down like shooting stars or something. And sometimes there are some people that get it all the time, and apparently he was one.
He was one.
No, which I'm sure he was referring to Shakespeare at that point.
Right. So why do you think it is that he suddenly has no inspiration for that little piece of time in the book? Like where everything he writes is just wrong. It just sounds wrong. It just is wrong. It's just awful.
I don't know. I think that comes back to like the destiny thing.
That's what I was going to say.
I know it keeps saying, everyone keeps thinking you're in charge of your destiny. That's not how it's ending up in this book. It's just other things are happening that are not what you were trying to have happen.
Right. Isn't that somebody says something in the play or in the book about like Well sits down afterwards after the play is over, and he starts writing down furiously everything that people just said, and it somebody says, like, that was it. That's what it was meant to be. Maybe it's him that says that. So maybe it is just the destiny thing.
That's what I thought. But then I also thought maybe there's something else I was missing, because somewhere I read something about a play within a play, which happens in this book, was also from one of the Shakespeare plays, but I haven't seen or read any of those, so I didn't know.
I don't remember which one. It's been a long time. We can talk about, like, I've read a handful of the Shakespeare plays. I don't know if I can remember all of the ones I've read, but I know I read Macbeth and Hamlet both in high school. It's been a couple years. So I recognized a lot of the references, but it's not like I read them recently enough to be able to say which, which. So, but yeah, I think it's just another one of those things. So I just love that everything is not the way you expect it to be. Yes. Nothing, like from the destiny thing to the fact that the witches don't want to interfere with anything, which really in fantasy culture, that's what the witches want to do. The witches want to interfere with everything,
Yeah.
And they don't want to get involved. Mm-hmm. And just everything in the book is turned on its head. Everything is like, the fool is the one that becomes the king. Everything is twisted from where you would expect it to be.
Yes. I agree. So I don't think I have any more. I didn't have any more notes. We went through everything I had.
I think we went through most everything that I had. I guess, I feel like where I said Terry Pratchett's, wittier and smarter than I am, probably. A lot, probably. But I feel like there's another level to the book that I just haven't quite caught up to yet. And that's one of those things I feel like, well, I just need to read it again. Maybe in 10 years when I'm a smarter person. When I'm hopefully a smarter person. Because I feel like there's more there in terms of commentary on our society, commentary on our culture, on,
Yeah, I agree, and it makes me want to read some of his more recent books of times when I remember the pop culture and I know about it more. Because obviously with this one, it was published the year I was born, so it was written before I was born. And I recognized some of the references that are still applicable today, like the Lord of the Rings and the Disney ones and things like that. But it just makes me wonder what is hidden in his other books.
Yes. So yeah, and I think the more you understand those things, you can understand kind of the bigger picture. I think it can just be entertainment, mm-hmm. But I also think there are things he is saying that I'm missing. I think there are a few statements in some of that you can get away with saying a lot of truth and humor. Mm-hmm. And I think there are things that he is saying, and I feel like I get some of it, but I feel like I don't get all of it. I feel like there's something like just there, like at the edge where I can almost get a hold of it, but there's a little bit more there than I'm able to kind of wrap my head completely around. Yeah. So I'd be interested. I think I'd like to read the rest of the Wyrd sisters. I think if I say I will read all of the Terry Pratchett books, that's too much. I don't think I can commit. But there are 6 witch books. I feel like I could say I could read those and then go from there.
Yeah, so I started reading just a few days ago the first one, which is called Equal Rights. And it's so far so good. It has no chapters. And it has Groaning Weatherwax. And she does seem a little bit different in this book. So I'm not sure if she's... And I'm not sure how much later the next book is, in her lifetime. But it's going to be interesting because there are some things so far that have happened that I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't line up with what she said in Wyrd Sisters. So it's going to be interesting to see if it's just a discrepancy, or if she learns something that changes her mind.
That'd be interesting. I seem to remember running across something somewhere that said that that happens within the whole Discworld universe with all the different books, that there are inconsistencies, that there are things with the characters or with the world that sometimes are contradictory. Like there's a generally things are pretty consistent.
Well, it must be nice for Terry Pratchett, because I mean, how seriously can you take this place when it's a flat world on top of elephants on top of a turtle flying through space? I mean, really.
That's not serious? We gotta find out what that means.
So unless you have anything else about this book, do you want to go ahead and introduce next month's read, which is your pick?
Oh, yes. Yes, I should have had it here so I could.
Oh, well, I don't have it with me either. But
beautiful cover. So we read, I had to think of the first one. So we read Garth Nix's Sabrio a couple months ago, before we had our video thing going, before we had our live stream chat here. So we're going to read book 2, which is, if I say it wrong, Lirio?
Yeah, that's how I say it.
Okay.
I don't know. I've listened to the audiobook of the first one, but not the second one, so I'm not exactly sure how to say it.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to go with that, and if we find out otherwise, then. So you know more about this than I do, but it's fantasy series. The 6th one or the 5th one just came out?
The 5th one just came out. So there are 5 books. The first 3 are a trilogy. The 4th one is a prequel set in the same world, the same area as the trilogy, but several hundred years before. And the 5th one picks up where the 3rd one left off, like 7 months later. So it's so it fits in very well, and I'm excited to read it. I've read the trilogy lots and lots of times because I love them. So yes, it's exciting.
I'm super excited. The first one was amazing. I did what I never do, and I listened to the whole thing and didn't read it. Usually I don't do an audiobook until I've read it first, so that, especially if it's a fantasy or science fiction type book, so that all of the completely made up words and worlds and things, I have a frame of reference for it before I hear it. But it was amazing to listen to, and I'm kind of wishing I was listening to the second one, but I'm going to try it the hard way this time. I'm going to try and read it the real way this time. But super excited. I haven't read anything else by Garth Nix. It is amazing. The writing is amazing on the first one. So Lirio, we'll post it up tonight, and hopefully people will join us.
I hope so, because it is one of my favorite books. It's like this series is like in my top 10, like almost as much as Harry Potter. I love it.
That's what I was just gonna say. Is I have a post from you from a little over a year ago that says, I wish somebody would read this series because it's Harry Potter-esque levels of excitement when a new book comes out.
Oh yeah, and so the 3rd one came out a long time ago. Like it had to have been around 2000 or 2003 or something, so a super long time ago. And then the 4th one didn't come out until a couple of years ago, and it was disappointing for me just because even though it was in the same world and it dealt with a character that was in the other books, it wasn't about the main characters. So I was disappointed, but this one that just came out was so perfect and I loved it. And it just picks up right where I wanted it to, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I just really loved it, and I was really happy.
Well, fantastic. Well, I need to read all of them, but I'll make sure I have the next one, and that I stick to just the next one for our chat.
Yes, it is. I think it is my favorite out of the whole series.
Oh, really? Book 2 is the favorite?
Mm-hmm. It's also the longest one, I'm pretty sure. But
it's not for the weak of heart. I didn't look at the exact page count, but it's between 600 and 700 words. It's a hefty book. But anybody that wants to listen to it or download the audiobook too.
Mm-hmm. And I think
blank.
I'm fairly sure that Tim Curry did do the audiobooks for the original trilogy. I don't think he did the 4th, and I was disappointed that he didn't do the 5th one because I kind of wanted to listen to it too.
So sad.
Because yeah, he's really amazing.
Yeah, just the best audiobook experience I've ever had. So I think
it's one of the 2 audiobooks that I own. I own 2 audiobooks, and that is one of them.
I own more than 2. But I went through a phase where like that's all I did was I listened while I drove back and forth to work. And I couldn't quite give books up, so that was the compromise. But it's by far probably my favorite audiobook as far as the reader and the experience goes. So if that doesn't sell you on
anyone who's watching this, that means you should read or listen to these books.
Yes, and join us next month because it'll be amazing.
It will.
All right.
So, thanks for watching, and tune in next time.